The City in the Mask. Cleveland was a city of contradictions. In the daylight, it wore the face of ordinary America. Brick row houses with worn porches, coffee shops buzzing with small talk, children chasing basketballs on cracked asphalt courts. But at night the mask slipped. Neon lights flickered like broken promises, alleys echoed with deals whispered too fast to catch, and the river carried more secrets than reflections. It was a city that could swallow a man whole, if he wasn't already rotten inside. Detective Mark Rawls liked to think he wasn't rotten. At least not in the daylight. In the eyes of his colleagues he was everything a cop should be, sharp, disciplined, loyal. He carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who could walk into chaos and bring order out of it. In the department people respected him, some even admired him. He solved cases with uncanny efficiency, often spotting details others overlooked. Reporters sometimes called him a natural-born cop, a phrase that clung to him like a medal he never asked for. But Mark knew better. He knew that in every metal there was rust. And at night when the city turned dark, so did he. It started small years ago, an extra cut from a drug bust, a little cash skimmed off the top. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. The streets were cleaner, the department got its win, and Mark had a thicker wallet. But the hunger grew. It wasn't just money. It was control. Power. The thrill of moving unseen between two worlds. The lawman who shook hands by day, and the shadow who pulled the strings by night. By the time Mark was 38, his second life was no secret to himself. It was his real life. The badge was just the costume. The real Mark lived in the dark, where his name wasn't Mark at all. In certain circles they called him Ghost because he could slip in and out of places without leaving a trace. He didn't need to get his hands dirty often. He had men for that. But when he did, when someone needed to disappear permanently, Ghost could be as cold as the river at midnight. That evening, the city was washed in rain. Mark sat in his unmarked cruiser, engine idling, watching drops chase each other across the windshield. His partner, Detective Sanchez, was in the convenience store grabbing coffee, joking with the cashier. Sanchez trusted him completely. That was the irony, everyone trusted Mark Rawls. Mark's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. Not his department-issued cell, but the other one, the one with no name and no contract. He pulled it out, checking the encrypted app. A single message. Truck arrives at Pier 7 midnight. Package must disappear before the feds sniff it. Mark slid the phone back into his pocket. His heart rate didn't change. His face didn't move. To Sanchez, stepping back into the car with two steaming cups, Mark was just another tired cop on another long night. Black, no sugar, Sanchez said, handing him one. Mark took it, sipped, and nodded his thanks. He didn't say much. People liked that about him. They thought it meant he was focused, disciplined. In reality, silence was just the best mask. The rest of the shift passed without incident. A drunk and disorderly call, a domestic disturbance that ended with tears instead of handcuffs, paperwork that piled higher than patience. By 2 in the morning, Mark was driving home, Sanchez asleep in the passenger seat. Mark dropped him off, waved, and headed toward his own neighborhood. But he didn't drive home. Not yet. He pulled into a deserted lot near the river, switched cars, traded the department cruiser for a nondescript black sedan waiting in the shadows. Inside the trunk was a change of clothes, dark jeans, leather jacket, black gloves. The mask of Detective Rawls was folded neatly into the glove compartment. Now he was Ghost. By the time he reached Pier 7, the rain had thinned to a mist. The docks smelled of rust and diesel. A semi-truck sat under the skeleton of a broken floodlight, its engine off, its cab empty. 2 of his men were already there, faces hidden beneath hoodies. "What's in the truck?" Ghost asked. His voice was calm, measured, stripped of the polite tone he used at the precinct. "Coke," one of them said. "South American, fresh off the boat." Ghost nodded. He didn't need the details. All he needed to know was how to move it without leaving a trail. And thanks to his badge, thanks to the access only Detective Rawls could provide, he already knew which patrol routes to avoid, which federal task force was looking the other way tonight, and how long they had before daylight. The men got to work, transferring crates into a smaller van that would disappear into the city before dawn. Ghost oversaw it quietly, hands in his pockets, mind already calculating the next step. The product would flood the streets in a week, and the department would hear whispers. Then, like magic, Detective Rawls would get a tip, make a bust on one of the rival crews, and come out looking like a hero again. It was a perfect cycle. A machine. And Ghost was the one pulling the gears. But even perfect machines can grind themselves down. As the last crate slid into the van, Ghost lit a cigarette. The lighter he used wasn't just any lighter. It was a silver Zippo engraved with an emblem. A gift from his son, given years ago on Father's Day. He hadn't meant to bring it tonight, but old habits die hard. He flicked it open, flame hissing in the mist, then snapped it shut. One of his men glanced at it, then looked away. Ghost didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. By 4 a.m., the docks were empty again. The truck gone, the van vanished into the night. Ghost switched back to his cruiser, drove home, and by the time the sun rose over Cleveland, he was Detective Rawls again. He showered, kissed his wife on the cheek, poured himself coffee, and sat at the breakfast table reading the paper. The mask was back on, seamless. No one at the precinct would suspect that hours earlier, their star detective had orchestrated the very crimes they were sworn to fight. No one would suspect, at least not yet, that the smallest detail could unravel the entire double life he had so carefully built. And it would. Because sometimes it isn't the crimes that destroy a man. It's the little things he forgets to hide. The first crack. The morning after the doc's job, Mark Rawls walked into the precinct carrying 2 cups of coffee like a man with nothing to hide. He looked like every other detective in the building. Overworked, underpaid, and already sick of paperwork before the clock struck 9. The bullpen was buzzing. Phones rang, typewriters clicked. Yes, some old-timers still clung to them, and the stale scent of burnt coffee mixed with cologne and sweat. Mark set 1 cup on his partner's desk. 2 creams, no sugar, he said, sliding it to Sanchez. Sanchez grinned. You're the only guy in this department who remembers that. Mark shrugged. It's the details. The irony wasn't lost on him. Details were what made him. Details solved cases. And sometimes, details destroyed lives. Across the room, Lieutenant Harris leaned out of his office, calling Mark over. Harris was a hard man to impress. 25 years in the job, scars on his knuckles, eyes like dull glass. But for Mark, the lieutenant always made exceptions. You're leading on the warehouse fire, Harris said as Mark stepped in. Looks like arson, maybe cartel-related. I want you running point. Mark kept his face still, but inside something tightened. He knew exactly what fire Harris meant. It wasn't a cartel job, it was one of his own cleanups, a rival crew's stash torch to keep them out of business. He'd even sent the tip himself through a burner to redirect suspicion. Got it, Mark said. I'll put a team together. Harris nodded, satisfied. You're a shark, Rawls. Always 2 steps ahead. That's why you're moving up fast. Mark left the office with the faintest trace of a smile. Every time he buried one life, the other one bloomed. But sharks don't just swim, they bleed. That night, while Rawls the cop combed through ashes with the fire marshal, Ghost the criminal handled a very different problem. One of his men, a young runner named Deacon, had gotten sloppy. Caught on camera boosting electronics for extra cash, nothing to do with their main operation. That kind of recklessness attracted attention, and attention was poison. Ghost met Deacon under the steel beams of an abandoned rail yard. The city hummed in the distance, neon bleeding against the night sky. You think you're clever? Ghost said, voice low and even. Deacon swallowed hard. It was just side money, boss. Nobody's gonna. Ghost's gloved hand clamped around his jaw. Side money gets us noticed. Noticed gets us killed. Or worse, caught. He let go and Deacon stumbled back, rubbing his face. I'll fix it. Oh. The gunshot cut him off. Quick, efficient, no echo beyond the rails. Ghost didn't flinch. He just turned to his other man who'd been watching silently. Make it clean, Ghost said. No loose ends. Deacon's body disappeared into the night. Just another ghost swallowed by the city. The next morning, Detective Rawls filed paperwork on the warehouse fire. The same hands that had pulled the trigger now typed neat sentences about suspected gang retaliation. The same mind that had ordered a man's death now mapped out leads to chase, suspects to question. And yet, there it was. The first crack. It came in the form of a crime scene photo slid across his desk by Sanchez. Check this out, Sanchez said. From the warehouse fire. CSI found this near the east exit. Mark's eyes fell on the picture. His chest went still. It was a photo of a silver lighter. The lighter. The same one he had flicked open at Pier 7, the night of the shipment. The photo was grainy, but the engraving was unmistakable. For a second his mind blanked. He remembered the moment. The rain, the flame, the snap of metal shutting. He hadn't dropped it, had he? He couldn't have. He carried it home. He always carried it home. Recognize it? Sanchez asked. Mark forced his throat to work. Just looks like a lighter to me. Probably belongs to one of the dock guys. Sanchez nodded, unconvinced. Yeah, maybe. Still it's nice. Expensive. Weird thing for a grunt to have. Mark said nothing. He forced his eyes to drift away, forced his hands to move, flipping through the rest of the evidence. But inside, something cold was creeping under his ribs. Because he knew. That lighter was his. Over the following days, Mark doubled down. Every movement became sharper, more precise. He led the arson case with relentless focus, chasing dead ends he created himself, feeding Sanchez plausible theories while burying the truth under layers of false leads. On the surface he was the same old Rawls, efficient, calm, incorruptible. But every time he reached into his pocket and felt the lighter's weight, the phantom image of that photo burned in his mind. At night, as Ghost, he took harsher precautions. Meetings grew shorter. Orders were delivered through intermediaries. Trust shrank to a pinpoint. And when one of his lieutenants asked casually if he'd heard about the lighter the cops found, Ghost's stare turned the man to stone. "Lighters are cheap," Ghost said. "People lose them every day." But in the silence that followed, even his men seemed to sense it. The machine wasn't perfect anymore. Something small, something stupid had slipped. And from small cracks, whole walls collapse. Weeks later, Harris called him in again. Promotion talk. They were looking for a new head of the organized crime task force. Rawls was the top candidate. A cop who understood the streets. Mark smiled politely, accepted the congratulations. But deep down he knew the truth. He wasn't climbing higher because he was perfect. He was climbing higher because no one had looked too close, yet. And if they ever did, if that lighter found its way into the wrong hands, everything he had built, both lives, would come crashing down. And sharks don't survive outside the water. The rise. The ceremony was modest, held in the precinct's conference room. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the smell of coffee and old carpet mixing with cologne and aftershave. But to the men and women gathered there, it was still something worth applauding. Detective Mark Rawls, promoted to commander of the organized crime task force. Harris, standing stiff as a board, pinned the insignia on Rawls's lapel. "You've earned this," the lieutenant said, shaking his hand. "Nobody knows this city like you do. You'll clean it up." Applause followed. Sanchez slapped him on the back, grinning like a proud brother. Mark smiled faintly, nodded, muttered thanks. On the surface it was perfect. A dream realized. But perfection had a cost. And Rawls knew he was already paying. The first weeks in his new role were consumed by meetings, briefings, endless stacks of intel reports. He sat at the head of the table now, commanding squads of detectives, federal liaisons, even analysts from D.C. His word carried weight. His signature could greenlight raids, freeze accounts, topple crews. And the irony never left him. Every move he made against the city's criminals only cleared the board for his own empire. The Ghost thrived in the shadows of Commander Rawls's spotlight. Rivals were dismantled under the guise of police operations. Street corners were left open for his people to claim. Every arrest was a chess piece sliding into place. But the higher he climbed, the thinner the air grew. Trust became rare. He had to smile more, joke more, shake more hands. And all the while, paranoia scratched at him like rats in the walls. It was the lighter. Always the lighter. It showed up again one afternoon in a case file from forensics. A technician had tagged it as item number 17 from the warehouse fire. No fingerprints recovered, no DNA. Just an expensive Zippo with an engraving no one had identified. Sanchez dropped the file on his desk. "Things haunting us," he said, smirking. "Almost like it wants to talk." Mark forced a chuckle. "Yeah. Too bad lighters can't testify." But after Sanchez left, Mark stared at the photo until his jaw ached from clenching. The engraving, those initials, Emmer, blurred before his eyes. He wanted to burn the file, to erase it from the system, but that would only draw suspicion. So he let it sit there, a ghost on paper, whispering at him every time he opened the drawer. Meanwhile, the Ghost kept working. The empire expanded. His men moved shipments through the docks, through warehouses he himself had seized as evidence in raids. Dirty cash flowed like water. Politicians who owed him favors smiled at banquets, shaking his hand, calling him the city's savior. But Ghost had problems. One of them was a man named Victor Kane, a rival boss who refused to be erased. Kane's crew ran guns through the east side, and every attempt to squeeze him only seemed to make him stronger. "Guy's a cancer," Ghost muttered during a midnight meeting in a shuttered bar. His lieutenants leaned in, smoke swirling above them. "We cut him out before he spreads." But Kane was slippery, too slippery. Every time Ghost set a trap, Kane sidestepped it. Every time Ghost tried to tighten the noose, Kane slipped free. Worse, Kane seemed to know things. Routes, names, plans, that only someone with inside knowledge could provide. Made Ghost wonder. Was there a leak in his crew? Or had the police side of his life started to catch scent of the shadows he thought he'd buried? One evening, long after the precinct had emptied, Rawls sat in his office staring at the city map pinned to his wall. Colored pins marked gangs, territories, investigations. To most eyes it looked like strategy. To his, it was both, a blueprint for dismantling rivals and a roadmap for empire. A knock at the door pulled him out of thought. Detective Carla Briggs stepped in, young, sharp, the kind of officer who didn't miss much. She carried a file. "Commander," she said, "I thought you'd want to see this. One of the forensics guys found something new on that lighter from the fire." The word hit him like ice water. He kept his face neutral. "Go on." They traced the model number. Limited run. Only a few hundred sold in Ohio. Mostly gifts, apparently. Pretty expensive. She flipped open the file, showing receipts. "We're cross-referencing buyers. Thought you'd want to know." Rawls nodded slowly, keeping his breathing steady. "Good work. Keep me posted." Carla smiled, sharp as a blade. "Of course, sir." When she left, Mark's hands were trembling under the desk. The lighter wasn't just a ghost now. It was a noose tightening around his neck. That night, Ghost ordered another cleanup. Not a rival this time, but one of his own men. An older lieutenant who had been careless with money, maybe too talkative in bars. Ghost pulled the trigger himself, not out of necessity but out of rage. The body hit the floor with a dull thud, blood seeping into the boards. "Anyone else feel like talking?" Ghost asked the others, voice calm, eyes dead. Silence. Not even a breath. The ghost still commanded fear. But fear wasn't the same as loyalty. He knew that. And loyalty was the only thing that kept an empire from collapsing. By the end of that month, Commander Rawls stood in front of cameras at City Hall, shaking hands with the mayor. Reporters shouted his name, calling him the man who was finally bringing Cleveland's underworld to its knees. His wife stood beside him, beaming, their teenage son in a suit and tie for the first time. And in his pocket, the lighter sat like a stone. The cameras flashed. The applause rose. And in the crowd, just beyond the lights, Detective Briggs watched him with eyes that didn't blink. The cruel balance. Night fell heavy over Cleveland, a thick, humid blanket that made the city feel restless. Patrol cars crawled the streets, sirens cutting through the air like warnings. But in the commander's office on the 4th floor of the precinct, Mark Rawls sat in silence, staring at the lighter in his hand. The silver case glinted under the lamp. The initials MR caught the light like an accusation. He should have destroyed it. Tossed it into the river. Melted it down. But instead, he kept it close, as though holding on to it gave him control. A mistake, maybe the biggest he'd ever made. A knock on the door snapped him out of thought. He slid the lighter back into his pocket. "Come in," Rawls said. Detective Briggs stepped in, crisp and professional. "Commander, I've been digging through those purchase records we flagged. Narrowed down the lighter sales. Fewer than 20 in Cleveland. Half were gifts." She paused, watching his reaction carefully. Funny thing though. One shop owner remembered selling one to a woman who asked for initials engraved. That ring any bells?" Mark kept his tone flat. "Common initials. Could be 100 people in this city. Keep digging." Briggs nodded, but her eyes lingered. She wasn't convinced. Not yet. When she left, Mark exhaled slowly. The walls were closing in inch by inch. That night, Ghost called his inner circle to a warehouse by the docks. The smell of oil and salt water hung in the air. 6 men sat around a battered table, faces lit by a single dangling bulb. "We've got a problem," Ghost said. His voice carried no hesitation, but his eyes swept each of them, weighing their loyalty. "Someone's been talking. Kane's crew is too well informed. We've lost 2 shipments in the last month. Somebody in this room is feeding him." The silence was thick. No one moved. Ghost pulled a pistol from under his jacket and laid it on the table. His hand rested on it casually, like a reminder of gravity. "Loyalty isn't optional," he said. "It's survival. So I'll make this simple. If anyone here has been sloppy, now's the time to confess." No one spoke. His gaze landed on a man named Doyle, a lieutenant who'd been with him for years. Doyle looked calm, too calm. "Doyle," Ghost said. "Where were you last Tuesday?" Doyle blinked. "With the crew. At the South warehouse." "That warehouse burned," Ghost replied softly. "And the cops were already waiting when they got there. How would they know?" Doyle's throat bobbed. "I." The shot echoed off the walls, sharp and final. Doyle's head snapped back, his body collapsing across the table. Blood pooled around the pistol Ghost still held steady. "Clean it up," Ghost said, standing. "We don't leave stains." The others scrambled, dragging Doyle's body away, scrubbing the table, burning the chair he'd sat in. Ghost lit a cigarette, the Zippo flame dancing in the shadows. None of them dared look at the engraving. The next morning, Commander Rawls stood in front of his task force, delivering orders with calm precision. "Kane's crew is shifting territory. I want eyes on the east side. No mistakes." Detective Briggs stood in the back, her arms folded. She didn't speak, but her gaze burned into him. Sanchez leaned close, whispering, "You've got Briggs breathing down your neck, man. She's ambitious. Don't let her make you a target." Rawls smirked faintly. "Ambition's good. Keeps people sharp." But inside the words cut. Because ambition also got people killed. Later that week, Briggs made her move quietly. She requested files, old ones, cases Rawls had worked before his promotion. She didn't announce it, didn't wave it in anyone's face. But patterns began to emerge. Arsons with no suspects, robberies with no leads, investigations that ended just a little too neatly. And there, like a signature, the lighter kept appearing. Witness statements mentioning a flash of silver. Photos from different angles. The engraving never fully visible, but always there, lurking in the background. Briggs didn't say anything yet. She wanted proof. Solid proof. That night, Ghost walked alone down the riverfront, the city lights reflecting in dark water. He stopped at the edge, pulled the lighter from his pocket and flicked it open. The flame hissed in the breeze. For a moment, he considered throwing it into the water, watching it sink into blackness. But he didn't. Because the lighter wasn't just metal. It was his son's gift, the last piece of innocence in a life long since poisoned. Destroying it would mean cutting away the last reminder that once, years ago, he'd been a father first, not a ghost. So he snapped it shut, slid it back into his pocket and walked away. Behind him, the river kept its silence. But the city didn't. The city was whispering, watching, waiting for the moment when even ghosts couldn't hide. And somewhere, in an apartment lit by a single lamp, Detective Briggs pinned photos to her wall, the lighter at the center like a spider in its web. The double trap. Cleveland's air was thick with smoke that week. Kane's crew had gone bold, drive-bys on the east side, fires in warehouses that belonged to Ghost's men. The newspapers ran screaming headlines about a gang war, while City Hall demanded blood. And at the center of it all stood Commander Mark Rawls, the man everyone believed could bring order to chaos. Every camera loved him. Every microphone sought his voice. "We will restore peace," he promised at a press conference, jaw set, eyes steady. "No one is above the law." The irony was so sharp it almost cut him. But beneath the calm exterior, panic grew. Briggs was circling closer every day. She wasn't reckless, no wild accusations, no sloppy leaps. She was precise, patient, dangerous. And patience was the one thing Rawls couldn't fight. So he laid a trap. Detective Owens was young, overeager, and careless. He liked fast cars, expensive suits, and women who whispered in the wrong ears. Perfect scapegoat material. Rawls began planting seeds. Quiet mentions in meetings about Owens being too close to certain informants. Subtle suggestions that some of Kane's intel leaks could be coming from inside. He slipped falsified reports into the system. Documents that seemed to show Owens signing off on files he'd never touched, accessing databases at odd hours. By the time Rawls was finished, Owens's shadow looked darker than the truth. The task force moved fast. Internal Affairs pulled Owens into a cold room, sat him under bright lights and began to peel at him. Rawls watched from behind the glass, arms folded, face neutral. "I didn't leak anything." Owens barked, sweat running down his temple. "I'm loyal, ask anyone." "You spend time with a woman named Lydia Ramos?" the IA officer asked. Owens froze. "She's on Kane's payroll," the officer continued. "Funny coincidence, isn't it?" Owens stammered, tried to explain, but the more he talked, the deeper he sank. The trap closed like jaws. Sanchez leaned toward Rawls behind the glass. "You were right. Kid's dirty. Damn shame." Rawls only nodded. Better to cut out the rot before it spreads. But inside he felt nothing. No triumph, no relief. Only the gnawing sense that the wrong prey had been caught, and the hunter was still out there. Because Briggs wasn't fooled. That night she slipped into the evidence archive. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, the shelves looming like silent witnesses. She pulled the lighter's file again, flipping through photographs, reports, serial numbers. Her eyes lingered on one note from a technician. Engraving partially legible, appears to be initials, MR. She whispered the letters aloud. "MR." Her mind didn't jump straight to Rawls. It resisted because the idea was too big, too insane. The Golden Commander, the star cop, the man who shook hands with mayors and smiled for cameras? No, it couldn't be him. But evidence didn't care about reputations. And the web she was building pointed in only one direction. Meanwhile, Ghost struck back at Kane. His men ambushed a shipment on the east side, bodies dropping into the gutter. But victory felt hollow. Kane was still standing, still striking, still knowing too much. Back at the safe house, Ghost paced, cigarette smoke curling around him. Someone's feeding him, he growled. Owens is gone, but he's still 3 steps ahead. His lieutenants glanced at each other nervously. No one dared speak. Ghost slammed a fist against the table. Find me the leak, or I'll start cutting throats until there's nothing left to bleed. They nodded quickly, scattering into the night. The next morning, Rawls arrived at the precinct looking sharp, suit pressed, smile measured. The mask was flawless. But Briggs was waiting for him in the hallway, file in hand. "Commander," she said evenly, "we need to talk." Rawls tilted his head. "About?" She opened the file, revealing the photo of the lighter. The initials were faint, but visible. "Funny thing," she said. "I've been cross-checking lighter sales. Only one matches both the engraving and the timeline." Her eyes locked onto his. "A gift. From a wife to her husband. Engraved with his initials. The silence stretched. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Rawls's smile didn't falter. "You're reaching, Briggs. You think I'd be careless enough to drop something like that? You think the commander of this task force moonlights as a criminal?" He chuckled softly. "Ambition's dangerous. Don't let it blind you." Briggs held his gaze. "Details matter. And you know that better than anyone." She closed the file, but the look in her eyes told him everything. She wasn't letting go. That night, Rawls sat alone in his study at home. His wife was asleep upstairs, his son buried in homework. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He poured a glass of bourbon, staring at the lighter on the desk. The flame flicked alive, dancing in the glass reflection. He snapped it shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The double life was tilting. The mask and the monster were bleeding into each other, and for the first time Mark Rawls wondered which one was real, and which one was the disguise. And deep down he knew the truth. The disguise was the cop. The ghost was who he had always been.